You're listening the Virtual CISO podcast, providing the best insight on information security and security IT advice to business leaders everywhere.
Right. So would it be fair for like someone listening to say, DLT is effectively another type of database, right? Okay, good.
That's exactly right.
Because I think most people like that database concept. I like the transaction component or the register component, because I think it, like databases you tend to think of as being these large blocks of information, where ledgers you think of something which is going on, going off, and people trying to keep track, right? It's got more of that inherent tracking mechanism, in which is a critical part, right, of blockchain and any of the DLT technologies, right? Is this record keeping that's immutable, effectively, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things you mentioned in your speech that I thought was really cool was some of these new social networks, I guess is the right word to say it, right way to say it. And you said that in these social networks, rather than having this central repository, the Facebook or the Twitter or whoever is going to be sitting at the back end, effectively owning and processing and possessing all of that data, that you could be on a social network where you could share information with other people in your groups in that social network, but that data is never going to one of those central repositories, right? How does that work?
Yeah, so I think, if you think about it again as infrastructure, right? So the biggest cost for all of these providers is really their infrastructure, right? They manage and host huge amounts of data. And then they're like, great, well, in exchange for hosting that data, I'm then going to get to mine that data. So instead, if you said, okay, great, well, I'd like to have a social network with, my 100 friends, and we each agree that our little piece of the compute power will be shared, and the actual infrastructure and the application of that social network will then not be hosted by Facebook, but it will be shared hosting by all of us, right? So each of us hosts a little bit of that. This is simplifying it, right? But instead of having one centralized entity that owns all the infrastructure, that pays for all the infrastructure, and then owns all the data on it, each of us says, great, I'm willing to contribute to that infrastructure. I'm perhaps willing to contribute in micropayments. But then I really get to control, okay, then I say, nope, I don't want any level of advertising. Maybe I do. Maybe with this other group of friends, we're willing to say, you know what, sure, for this group about exchanging home furniture, I'm willing to share, some of our patterns of buying and selling. But in exchange for that, maybe, advertisers on there, pay us instead, right? So it's really about thinking, okay, how do I share the costs of this infrastructure? And then, of course, the applications have to be built to take advantage of that infrastructure, that shared infrastructure. And then I can control which things are provided maybe to that application, which things aren't provided to that application, and depending on the type of group that I'm a part of, maybe that changes.
So you're probably not old enough to remember these days, but there used to be these file sharing things like Bear Share and things where people could share movies and share music, right? You were kind of pirating it effectively, and it worked in a peer-to-peer model, right? But that peer-to-peer model, the distribution, the infrastructure, when you participated, your systems became part of that infrastructure. In this model that we're talking about here, are we using a similar model, or are we, like you said, through some form of micropayments, we're hosting, the minute that we're hosting there's an EC2 instance sitting in Amazon, someone's paying for that, someone has to administer it, right? So that kind of would break the model, or am I not really understanding?
You could do it either way,
Okay.
right? You could say, great, I want to host part of the infrastructure,
Mhm.
and I want, my group of people to each be able to host part of it, and I don't want anybody outside to have access to it,
Mhm.
right? So you really truly are sharing those infrastructure costs, and that group kind of bears that burden. Or you could say, okay, well, I'm willing to, have some of that infrastructure hosted elsewhere, but I will pay in micropayments so that infrastructure is not hosted by Facebook, right? So that it's hosted by another application that gives me the granularity to decide what kind of advertising I want, what kind of privacy controls I want, so you can kind of go the spectrum, right? If you say, great, like I don't actually have that compute, I'm not interested in doing that, but I am interested in some of these, more granular privacy controls, then maybe, maybe I agree that it is hosted somewhere else, but it's still very visible to me who has access to that data, where it is,